So coming up on Thanksgiving night, we have a Packers versus Dolphins matchup. Both teams played on Sunday, and so it's a short week. 4 days between Sunday's game and the Thursday night Thanksgiving game. And so I want to break this game down, and in the end, I will give my score prediction for this one. And this is going to be at Lambeau Field, and it's supposed to be very cold on Thursday, which I do think would lean in favor of the Packers, considering the Dolphins are from Miami, where it doesn't typically get this cold. And I'm pulling up my weather app right now to see what it's going to be in Green Bay. We have a high of 32 on Thursday in Green Bay. It is going to be the night game, and so I would assume it's going to be a little colder than 32. I assume the wind chill will be in the 20s, maybe the high teens potentially. So it's going to be a very cold one, which I do think is going to factor into this game. And I was reading some interesting stats for the Dolphins on their record in cold games, and I read this in a Bill Huber article. It says, per StatHead, the Dolphins haven't won a game in below freezing weather since 2013. They've lost 6 straight in freezing weather. So it's not a shock that a team that's from Miami, where it's a lot warmer than Wisconsin, has failed to find success in the cold. They haven't won a game in freezing weather since 2013, so 11 years. We also have here the Dolphins, Tua is 0-7 in games less than 40 degrees, according to Pro Football Talk. So Tua and the Dolphins have not been good in cold weather games. So there's a big advantage, I think, for the Packers coming in on Sunday. I also found an interesting stat for the Packers. Since since Matt LaFleur took over as a head coach, this is also from Bill Huber, the Packers are 6-4 at home with a kickoff temperature of 32 or colder. So slightly better than 500 in that area, but still not perfect. But I would still say the Packers have a slight advantage in that area. And now if we look at the Dolphins and their offense, you can't really look at their overall offensive numbers just because it is sort of swayed by Tua missing a few different games because of his concussion earlier in the season. And since he's come back, the Dolphins have had a very good offense that has put up a lot of points. In their last 3 games, they are the 4th best scoring offense in the NFL in just the past 3. And if you take out the other games where Tua wasn't playing, the Dolphins will be averaging 25 points a game, which would put them, if you rank them among other teams for the rest of the season, as the 9th best scoring offense in the NFL. So even though currently the Dolphins, their overall numbers, they're 24th in scoring, with Tua, they would be the 9th best scoring offense in the NFL. And when you look at the Dolphins, they have so many talented, fast players on the offensive side of the ball, from Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, 2 receivers who I still think are some of the better receivers in the NFL. Then you add some running backs like Devon Achane, who is a very talented receiver, insanely fast. They throw a lot of screen passes to him, and he turns those into lots of touchdowns. So it's a very talented offense when they're fully healthy and when Tua is playing, at least so far this season. Currently, Tua has the 8th most pass yards per game among quarterbacks, 13 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He is the 5th highest passer rating in the NFL. And so when Tua is playing really well, he's one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the NFL. The only thing with Tua, looking back to last year, he was really, really good against teams that weren't really playoff caliber. But then against top-tier competition, the Dolphins and Tua didn't really find that much success. And if you look at the Dolphins so far this year, they are 5-6, and they've only beaten one team that has a 500 record. The Rams, 5-5, are the only team the Dolphins have beat with more than 3 or 4 wins. I think the Colts have 4 wins. And so the Dolphins are a team that plays really good against, I'd say, lower tier competition. Against better teams, they sometimes struggle. They did play some pretty close games against the Bills this year, but they lost both of them to the Buffalo Bills. If we look at the Dolphins and their offensive line, they have one of the best when it comes to pressure percentage allowed, according to NFL Pro. The 2nd lowest pressure percentage allowed in the NFL at 25%. They are 18th in sacks allowed at 27. And I think for the Dolphins, when Tua is playing, they get the ball out so quickly, and it's so predicated on timing and hitting his receivers in rhythm that it can be tough to get pressure on him just because of how quickly he does get the ball out. And so for a Packers pass rush unit that has struggled a lot this year, currently, if we look at the Packers and their defense, they're 24th in pressure rate per NFL Pro at 31.5%, 20th in sacks. So I do think it will be tough to get to Tua just because of how quickly he gets the ball out, but we'll see if the Packers can make some noise in that area. I do think Rashawn Gary has gotten a lot better. He's been producing at a much higher level than earlier in the season, which has factored into the Packers getting some more pressure on the quarterback as of late. We saw last week against the 49ers, Lucas Van Ness going in there, getting a sack, forcing a fumble. And so it's good to see him, make a play like that, because I don't think he's played too great earlier this year in his second year after being drafted in the first round last season. And if you look at the Packers' defense so far this year, 10th best scoring defense, currently the same as last year, 10th with Joe Barry when it came to scoring. 11th best in total yards, 13th in yards per play allowed. And when we look at the Packers' secondary, they're 11th in pass yards allowed per game at 206.5. They're 16th in pass yards per play at 6.2. And one thing to watch in this game, which we've kept an eye on consistently for the past few weeks, ever since Jair suffered his knee injury, is whether or not Jair Alexander is going to play. We are still unsure as to whether he'll be available come Thursday. He's now missed a few games, and he is still the Packers' best cornerback. And outside of him, I don't think it's necessarily terrible cornerback play, but outside of Jair, when Jair isn't playing, I don't think the corners, are really playing at a top-tier level. And just here's a few stats here. This isn't the end-all, be-all stat, but I do think it gives a little bit of insight into how the Packers corners have played. So passer rating allowed for corners. These are corners with at least 50 snaps. This is according to PFF. Jair ranks 36th. These are just for corners. Eric Stokes, 105th. Carrington Valentine, 114th. And then Keyshawn Nixon, 115th. So you can see there, Jair 36th. The rest outside of the top 100. Not great. And then we also have from PFF, forced incompletion percentage among guys who have at least 50 snaps. Jair, 53rd. Carrington Valentine, tied for 94th. Keyshawn Nixon, tied for 108th. And Eric Stokes, tied for 131st. And so my thing with this game, when you look at the talent the Dolphins have at receiver, if Jair cannot go, I don't love the matchup for the Packers corners, just because I do think Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, they're some of the best receivers in the league. And I'm not sure if the Packers corners are going to be able to handle them based on how they've played so far this season. So hopefully Jair will be able to go. But considering it is going to be freezing cold temperatures, who knows how the wind's going to be, that does factor in the Packers secondary's favor. And so because of that, I think Tua could be off his game. And so that'll be something to keep an eye on in this one. If you look at the Dolphins' rushing attack, it hasn't been very good this year. Overall, 23rd in rush yards per carry at 4.1 yards per rush. And I was looking at the past 4 games. Against the Patriots, 2.7 yards per carry. Against the Raiders, 3.2 yards a carry. Against the Rams, 3 yards a carry. And against the Bills, it was one of their better days. In the past 4 games, 4.8 yards per carry. So in the past 4, that's 3.425 yards per carry, which if you rank that over the whole season will be dead last. And so they haven't been very good running the ball. I do think the way that they, run their screens with Devon Achane, in a sense, those are almost like runs just because they get the ball to him immediately and then he has a lot of room to run and he's an insanely explosive athlete. So I do think they use those screens and they're almost like runs in a way, just getting the ball to the running back in space. And so I think that does help them a little bit in that area. But passing-wise, they're a very talented offense when Tua is healthy. So it's going to be an interesting matchup here for the Packers and their defense. And Tua has been pretty good at not turning the ball over. If we look at his past 4 games, he, against the Patriots, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 317 yards. Against the Raiders, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. And so he's been playing at a really, really high level recently. So it's going to be an interesting matchup for the Packers. The Packers' third down defense has been much better than last year, 12th currently, allowing conversions just 35.66% of the time. And I think that has in large part due to Jeff Hafley dialing up a lot of different pressures on third down, which I do think at times can confuse opposing quarterbacks. And the Packers' biggest strength this year defensively has been their ability to force takeaways. Last week, they forced 3 with Xavier McKinney getting another interception with his league-tying 7th interception. And so he's been playing at a top-tier level. And then they forced 2 fumbles. Keyshawn Nixon forced 1 on Christian McCaffrey. And then Lucas Van Ness forced a sack fumble in the game as well. So they had 3 turnovers, didn't turn the ball over at all. And that's a formula for success, which has led to the Packers being tied for the most takeaways in the NFL per game at 2 per game. So we'll see if it keeps up this week. Tua has done a pretty good job of not turning the ball over. That could change, though, in freezing cold temperatures where Tua has not been very good overall in his career. Now moving to the Packers offense versus the Dolphins defense. I do think the Packers have one of the best offenses in the NFL. And when Jordan Love is healthy, the Packers offense is that much better. When he's not having to hobble around out there, he plays at a much higher level. And currently the Packers have the 8th best scoring offense in the NFL, 26.2 points a game, 5th most yards and 4th most yards per play. And the one area where the Packers have struggled before this past week had been the red zone. They'd been around close to the bottom 5 in the NFL in red zone conversion percentage, converting, red zone drives into touchdowns. This past week, they did take a massive jump up because they went 5 for 5 in the red zone. Josh Jacobs had 3 rushing touchdowns, and so that helped the Packers. And they jumped all the way up to 20th in red zone conversion percentage. So it was a big day for the Packers there, and that's an area where if the Packers continue to convert in the red zone at that level, they are going to be, I'd say, one of the top 3 offenses in the NFL because they're currently 8th best scoring offense, 4th when you look at yards per play, 5th in yards. If they keep converting these red zone drives, it's going to be tough to stop the Packers and this offense. If you look at Jordan Love this past game, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He did almost have a pick. Luckily, it was dropped. But we also have to factor in that one ball that was dropped by Christian Watson. Love could have had another touchdown, another 40 or so yards. So I think overall it was a very solid day for Jordan Love. And sometimes he does put the ball in harm's way, something he does need to clean up. But Jordan Love, I think, is still one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL. Currently, he has the 10th most pass yards per game. He has 18 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 7th in yards per attempt, so he's not afraid. He consistently pushes the ball down the field. He takes those risks down the field. And one thing to watch this week for the Packers and their passing attack is Romeo Doubs. He does have a concussion. I would doubt that he's going to play Thursday because from what I've seen, didn't practice early on Monday, and so he may be missing. The Packers do have an insane amount of depth in the receiver room. And we even saw Malik Heath finish the day with a touchdown this past week. And so I think the Packers will be fine without Doubs just because of the amount of talent they have with Jaden Reed, who is leading the Packers receiver room. Dontavian Wicks, he has dealt with a lot of drops. I still think he's a very talented wide receiver, so he could see some more snaps if Romeo Doubs is missing time. But the Packers' biggest strength this past week was their ability to run the ball. And Josh Jacobs has been one of the best running backs in the NFL. Turns out that bringing in Josh Jacobs was a very wise move by the Packers and Brian Gutekunst. And I do think Josh Jacobs has been able to handle more of a load than Aaron Jones has in years past. And even though Jacobs hasn't been quite as efficient when you just look at yards per carry, he has been more productive overall just because he is able to handle a massive workload, which Aaron Jones just really didn't seem to be able to handle quite as much. The Packers didn't really feed him as much as they feed Josh Jacobs. And Josh Jacobs has been very, very durable. Currently, Josh Jacobs has the 3rd most rush yards per game in the NFL. 3rd most rush yards overall. 944 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3rd most rush yards after contact. And he broke an insane amount of tackles against the 49ers last week. Finished with 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards. And honestly, the Packers' passing attack didn't have to do too much this past game because Josh Jacobs was, just carrying the Packers. And in a game that's going to be at freezing cold temperatures, I do think the Packers will want to try to rely on the run as much as they can. And Josh Jacobs mentioned it in a post-game interview after the game against the Niners about how when it gets colder, opposing defenders don't really want to tackle as much. And so it sounds like that could go in Josh Jacobs' favor. And so he did just have 26 carries. And there's been some, talk with Matt LaFleur, Josh Jacobs. Can he handle another big load just 4 days after? My guess would be yes. So we'll sort of see how the Packers decide to manage that. But the Packers' rushing attack has really been, I'd say, one of the biggest foundations of this offense, their ability to run the ball at the 3rd best level when it comes to overall yards in the NFL. And it helps as well when Josh Jacobs isn't on the field. There hasn't really been much of a drop-off because Emmanuel Wilson has run the ball really well as Chris Brooks. And then if we look at the Packers and their, when we look at situational football, I already brought up the red zone offense, which played great this past week. Currently, the Packers are 19th when it comes to third down conversions at 37.6%. So that's an area they can improve. And now if we take a look at the Dolphins defense and sort of how they match up with the Packers, the Dolphins defense has been a pretty solid unit. 11th best scoring defense, 7th best yards allowed, 9th in yards per play allowed. The past 3 games, they've been very dominant. It has been against somewhat lesser teams, maybe outside of the Rams. They allowed 15 to the Patriots last week, 19 to the Raiders, and then 15 to the Rams. I do think, though, because the Packers do have one of the best offenses in the league, they can take advantage. The Dolphins defense did allow 31 and 30 to the Buffalo Bills, and I would say the Packers are more in the Bills range of offenses than the Patriots and Raiders. And so I definitely think the Packers can take advantage, even though it is a pretty solid defensive unit overall. The Dolphins secondary, 8th best pass yards allowed, 9th in pass yards allowed per play, top 10. They still have Jalen Ramsey over there. They got a lot of talent on defense on the defensive line. Their pass rush has been pretty solid, 12th best pressure percentage in the NFL. And one thing for the Packers, I mean, they have had one of the best offensive lines. They are 12th when it comes to pressure percentage allowed at 30.9%. They have allowed the second fewest sacks in the league at 15. And so it helps when your offensive line is able to protect at, such a high level. And the Packers offensive line has been one of the best for years and years. When we look at the pass rush for the Dolphins, they are 28th in sacks. So they haven't gotten a ton of sacks, but they have gotten pressure at a pretty high level. The run defense is pretty similar to the rest of their defense. 9th in rush yards allowed, 16th in rush yards per play. So I do think the Packers can take advantage there. They're basically average when it comes to rush yards allowed per play. And then situationally, they're the 10th best third down defense in the NFL, 7th best red zone defense. So they do pretty good in that, sort of situational football. And then in takeaways, they're 18th in takeaways per game. And here's the thing with the Packers offense. I don't really, looking at these matchups, defenses that are top 10 defenses, they don't necessarily, you can't necessarily stop Jordan Love, even if you have a top 5, top 10 defense. I mean, it's possible, but, I don't look at these matchups for the Packers offense and say, oh, no, the Packers are facing a defense that is around the top 10 and points where it's going to be a tough game for them. That's not really the case. And even when we look at the Packers game against the Bears a few weeks ago, it wasn't pretty, especially defensively, but the Packers offense was still producing at a very high level outside of the Jordan Love interception. The Bears had one of the best secondaries in the NFL, and I think the Packers did take advantage. So I still think the Packers have a big advantage against the Dolphins defense in this one. And so all in all, I think the Packers are going to win this game. I think, looking at Tua's history in the cold, the Dolphins' history in the cold, the Dolphins not really having a ton of wins against really good teams in the past couple seasons, I do give the advantage here to the Packers at Lambeau Field on Thanksgiving night. So I'm going to say the Packers win this game. I'm going to say they put up, let's go with 27 to the Packers and then 24 for the Dolphins. I think it could be a close game. This is a talented Dolphins offense. So I'm going to say Packers beat them 27-24. Let me know your score prediction down in the comment section down below. I'll be out with a video post-game, after the game, to give my reaction. So make sure you have the post notifications turned on. That way you don't miss any more Packers content. But I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll see you guys next time.